is this image on the screen legal or not? The bicyclist riding on the road. So just to provide some context for folks, this is College Avenue at Magnolia Street. I know it's not the highest quality photo. This was an image that was emailed to us by a community member. And the community member was asking our department with the city of Fort Collins if this was a legal activity for the bicyclists to be doing. They're riding two abreast, headed southbound on College Avenue. They had just crossed the intersection of Magnolia on College Avenue. The speed limit you can see right there on the left side of the image is 30 miles an hour. A little bit further south of this is the Old Town area, and the speed limit in that particular area is 25 miles an hour. And so I'm going to give you guys just a few more seconds here to respond in the chat if you haven't gotten the opportunity yet. So you're going to type in your response into the Ask a Question feature, which is this icon here on the left side of the screen, two chat bubbles. One of them has a question mark in it. Type in your response on whether or not you think this is legal, and I'm going to give you a few more seconds to respond, and then we'll talk about this. And our moderator is in there right now. Her name is Lauren Nagel. She is going to be responding to any questions throughout the presentation. And she'll let me know what the consensus is for our questions for you guys, the audience. Okay, so I'm reading our moderator's response from what the group has typed into the Ask a Question feature. And my moderator, Lauren Nagel, says that the consensus is that this is probably not legal, and that there are a few folks who think that this is legal. So the answer is that this is legal. This is legal behavior. Bicyclists are allowed to ride two abreast, taking up the full lane on College Avenue in this particular area. And the law states that bicyclists are allowed to ride two abreast on the road as long as they are not unreasonably obstructing the flow of traffic. Now that is subjective. So some questions you might ask yourselves if a bicyclist is unreasonably obstructing the flow of traffic is, what is the speed limit, for example? And are there opportunities for the motorists to pass? What are the traffic volumes? Is this a high traffic volume street? Are there a lot of cars that use this road? Now, this area of College Avenue is open to bicyclists to ride. Bicyclists are not allowed to ride on College Avenue south of Laurel and up until Harmony Road. So between the stretch of College Avenue between Laurel and Harmony Road is off limits to bicyclists, and that's the only street in Fort Collins that is off limits to bicyclists. So all the other roads in the city of Fort Collins are open for bikes. People can ride on the road there. If this was a higher speed road, let's say Harmony Road, that has a speed limit of 45 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour, very high speed. And if it was a single lane road where there wasn't very many opportunities for motorists to pass, this could be a situation where the two bicyclists riding two abreast might be unreasonably obstructing the flow of traffic. So or impeding the flow of traffic. So that's something to consider. But in this particular situation, bikes are allowed to ride on this stretch of College Avenue. The speed limit is fairly low, between 25 and 30 miles an hour, and there's a passing lane on the left where motorists can pass these bicyclists. Bicyclists are not technically unreasonably obstructing the flow of traffic, so this is legal for bicyclists to do on this particular stretch of College Avenue. All right, well, thank you for your responses. We're going to move on to the next slide of our presentation here. So thank you for joining us today. This is our bicycle-friendly driving class. My name is Tracy Litford, and in the chat, moderating the chat is Lauren Nagel. Both of us are driving enthusiasts. We like to drive, and when we do drive, we like to drive as safe, and we like to have fun while we're doing it. And we're going to share our tips of driving well on the roads in Fort Collins with you today. So thank you for joining us, and happy Earth Day, everyone. Today is Earth Day, so hopefully you're doing something nice for the Earth today as well. So here are what our expectations are of you today while you're participating with us at home. If you have any questions throughout the presentation today, please use the Ask a Question feature as a part of this presentation. We talked about how to use that in the beginning here, but you can use this icon with the two text boxes. One of them shows a question mark feature. You can click on that and you should be able to type in your question or comment in there. And then Lauren, our moderator, will be responding to any questions that arise, and she'll be publishing those as necessary so that I can see them and I can address the class. After the presentation, there'll be an online exam. You'll get a link to the online exam afterwards provided by your teacher, and you must complete the exam, pass the exam with an 80% or higher to become a certified bicycle-friendly driver. So we'll give you guys a certificate after the class if you pass the exam with an 80% or higher. And you can take the exam more than once if you got answers that were incorrect. You can always go back and fix them and get 100%. And just another reminder that this presentation is being recorded, and we'll give you the recording, we'll give you access to the recording after the class today. So you can rewatch it if you want to, if that would help you for taking the online exam. All right, so these are the topics we're going to cover today. So we're going to review with you what we teach cyclists, what it means to share the road, talk about some bicycling specific infrastructure and how to navigate it as a driver, talk about common crashes between drivers and bicyclists and other situations to be aware of as drivers as well. So here's what we teach bicyclists. We teach bicyclists to ride defensively, which means to be visible and predictable. So this could mean choosing the correct lane positioning to suit your destination. So bicyclists would be choosing the left lane to make a left turn, for example. Be visible, so that might not always mean riding on the farthest right side of the road, and also being predictable. So this means communicating with other drivers, both through our hand signals like you see in the image here, but also with eye contact. We tell our bicyclists and we teach all of our bicyclists to stop at all stop signs and red lights and obey the traffic laws. And to make sure that bicyclists yield when changing lanes and control the lane or take the lane when appropriate. And we'll talk about more details of what that means a little bit later on in the presentation. Bicyclists are expected to ride on the right, but only as far to the right as they deem safe. So they may not always be hugging the curb. In fact, we don't want bicyclists to hug the curb because that can be dangerous. But they'll be riding on the right as far to the right as they choose, as they personally deem safe. And we also want bicyclists to choose the correct intersection positioning. So making a left turn from the left side of the road and not turning left from the right side of the road. That would be a dangerous situation, something that we wouldn't do in our cars. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. We tell bicyclists to obey the first come, first served rule at intersections. And we also teach our bicyclists that they fare best when they act and are treated as drivers of vehicles. And a bicycle is a vehicle, it's just not a motor vehicle. And as drivers, we should be treating bicyclists as vehicles as well, and everyone can fare better on the road and be safer if we treat bicyclists as vehicles, drivers of vehicles. Okay, so here's our next opportunity for you guys to interact. So my question for you folks today is, what is the difference between these two types of signs? So please use the Ask a Question feature, type in your response to that feature, and let me know what your thoughts are. What is the difference between these two signs? The square white sign that shows a bicyclist icon that says may use full lane. And what is the difference between that sign and the yellow diamond sign that says share the road with the bicyclist icon? What is the difference? I'm going to give you a minute here to respond. It's 10:56. Some people are just noting the color differences. Yep, they're definitely different colors, but there's some meaning behind the colors and the shape. What could the difference be between the differences in color and the differences in shape? Okay, it's been about a minute now, so I'm gonna tell you what the answer is. So the white sign is a regulatory sign. It tells us what the law is as drivers. So other examples of white rectangular or square regulatory signs are speed limit signs. So that tells us the law, what the speed is on the road that we're driving on. And this sign, this bicyclists may use full lane, tells us as drivers that bicyclists have the legal right to use the full lane. And we'll talk about why bicyclists may choose to use the full lane a little bit later on in the class. The yellow diamond sign is a warning sign or cautionary sign that warns drivers about things to be aware of while we are driving. So, for example, if you're driving in the Poudre Canyon, you might notice that there are these yellow diamond signs that show a winding arrow to let us know as drivers that the road is winding up ahead, that we might want to use slower speeds because of the road conditions. Other yellow diamond signs, warning signs out there, or cautionary signs are wildlife signs. So they're not necessarily telling us the rules of the road, the law, they're just warning us about what we can expect while we're driving. So we like to use more of these white rectangular signs or square signs because it shares with us as drivers what the rules of the road are, what is the law. Okay, so moving on to our next slide. Thank you for participating. This is our low stress network, and this is actually highlighting an area near your school here. So we have Fossil Ridge High School on the lower right side of the screen, and then you can see the colored roads on the screen. So this is our bicycle map that shows our low stress network. This is where we encourage bicyclists to ride because there's bicycle infrastructure on these roads. There's also lower traffic volumes on some of these colored roads. And it lets bicyclists know where are safer places for them to ride. It's also useful for us as drivers though, too, because it tells us as drivers where we can expect to see more bicyclists and where we can expect to see more bicycle infrastructure, which we're going to talk about next. Okay, so we're diving into the bicycle infrastructure, some examples of bicycle infrastructure. So before we dive into some of the details of each type of bicycling infrastructure, I just want to bring up some of the key features of the bicycling infrastructure that you'll see while driving. So the purpose is to communicate to bicyclists where they should be riding their bicycles and where the safest place is to ride your bicycle. It also lets us as drivers know where we can expect to see bicycles, people on bikes. So the green paint indicates to us as drivers where bicyclists may be, and these bicycle icons like we see on the far left show us where bicyclists might take the full lane. But the infrastructure also, most importantly, can help us decrease conflicts or crashes between people driving cars and people riding bikes, which is really important here. So let's talk about some details about what this infrastructure means. So this image that we have on the far left side of the screen is a SHARO, which is short for Share the Road Arrow. So what it means for us as drivers is that bicyclists might be taking the full lane here, and we as drivers should be sharing the road with bicyclists. And the reason that bicyclists would be sharing the road or taking the full lane here is because the roads where we see these SHAROs are oftentimes very narrow or narrower, where there's not enough space for a vehicle and a bicyclist to safely share the road side by side. So we don't want people to be tempted to do that. So we use these icons to signify to bicyclists that they can take the full lane, and also to motor vehicle drivers that bicyclists might be taking the full lane. So it's a reminder for both bicyclists and drivers that bicyclists might be using the full lane. So keep that in mind. The middle image here shows a bike box, which is this green paint painted at intersections where there's high bicycle traffic. So these are painted at near CSU and also at other schools where there's a lot of bicycle traffic. And the way they work is bicyclists at red lights will enter the bike box from the bike lane and then start filling that green box at the very front of the intersection. So there might be multiple bicyclists who are lining up in the box at the very front, in the front of the car that's parked behind the white line of the bike box. Cars are expected to stay out of the green paint area at red lights, park and wait behind the green paint while bicyclists line up in front of the vehicle. When the light turns green, bicyclists will have the opportunity to be the first road user to travel through the intersection and then continue through the bike lane on the other side. This will decrease conflicts between cars and bikes because bikes are, one, more visible. They also more efficiently travel through the intersection. And there are, in this particular example, there's no right turn on red. So there's fewer conflicts for turning vehicles interacting with bicycles in this bike box intersection here. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So it's another example of how this green paint can decrease conflicts between cars and bikes. And then this image on the right side is a Toucan crossing, and it shows an intersection where there's an enhanced crossing for bicyclists and pedestrians to use. So there's two types of road users that can use this type of infrastructure. So the two types is why the Toucan crossing is called a Toucan crossing. It means two can cross at the same time. Both bicyclists and pedestrians can cross an arterial or high volume street without car traffic traveling at the same time. So these kids in this image will push the button there on the traffic signal, and that will trigger a bike and ped signal phase in the light where pedestrians and bicyclists can cross the intersection together without having to interact with cars. And this image I just populated here shows another viewpoint of the Toucan crossing, showing bikes crossing in both directions across this major arterial, which is actually LeMay and Pitkin, I believe. This is on the Pitkin Bikeway. So these bicyclists can cross the intersection without having to interact with cars, which is a nice feature. Pedestrians can cross at the same time too, using the crosswalk that you see on the left side of the image. All right, moving right along here to other examples of infrastructure, we have a buffered bike lane on the far left side of the image here. And this bike lane is actually buffered on both sides of the bike lane. So both on the traffic side, on the left side of the bike lane, and also on the right side of the bike lane. The right side buffer provides a buffer between the parked cars and the bike lane, which can protect bicyclists from the door zone or add a little extra room between the door zone and the bike lane. And we're going to talk about the door zone more later. But this buffered bike lane does make bicycling on the roads more comfortable for people who choose to ride on the street. This example here in the middle shows green paint that helps guide bicyclists in the direction we want them to travel. In this particular example, the green paint is directing this bicyclist across the railroad tracks at a 90-degree angle, which is helpful for avoiding a crash because railroad tracks are a major hazard for bicyclists, and it's easy to crash if you don't cross at a 90-degree angle. So this directional paint helps guide bicyclists in that way. And then our last example on this page, on the far right, we show a contraflow bike lane. So you can see these green circle bike icons that go in both directions. This is infrastructure that guides bicyclists to ride against the flow of traffic legally. And this can help keep bicyclists safe by directing them in a way that helps them navigate an intersection safely. It can also provide two directions of traffic on a one-way street. So this example I just showed up on the screen here on the far right is an example of a contraflow bike lane on campus. So this is a one-way street for cars. The Sharrow icon you see that's big and close to us as the viewer, that indicates the direction of traffic, that bicyclists can take the lane. And then if you look on the far end of the picture here, next to the cars, there's an arrow pointing against the flow of traffic that is guiding bicyclists to ride on that side of the street in the opposite direction of traffic flow. So that is the contraflow right there. And as drivers of vehicles, if we are driving in an area where there is a contraflow bike lane, we should be aware that we might see traffic traveling in a direction that we may not expect. So bicycle traffic might be traveling against the flow of car traffic. So we need to make sure that we are hyper aware of our surroundings and looking for bicyclists in both directions. All right, so more examples of infrastructure here. We have a bike signal. So we have a bike signal at Laurel and Mason in the Old Town area next to campus. And this allows bicyclists to travel through the intersection without car traffic. So there is a bike specific phase in the traffic signal where only bikes can travel through the intersection of Laurel and Mason. So you might notice that when you're out driving. There's also these separated bike lanes. We have several of these throughout our community. This one is on Mulberry Street, west of Taft Hill, where we actually have physical posts that separate the bike lane from the car traffic lane to add that extra layer of protection for bicyclists, making bicycling on the street a little bit more comfortable for folks. And then this last image I have here on the right side is the mixing zone. And that mixing zone is highlighted by this dashed paint that you might see, dashed green paint, or just dashed white lines. There may not be green paint at all. It might just be a dashed line. And that indicates to drivers that drivers can temporarily drive across a bike facility, a bike lane, or something like that. And this is a mixing zone where bike traffic and car traffic will briefly interact. So as a driver, we should be checking for bicyclists in this area. And if we were biking, we should be looking for cars in this area as well. So we need to be looking out for all types of vehicle traffic, both for bikes and cars, when we see these dashed lines, this mixing zone. All right, so let's talk about some crash data that's specific to Fort Collins. So if you look at the pie chart on the right side of your screen, you can see that of the total crashes we have in Fort Collins, bicycle car crashes only represent about 3% of the total car crashes in our community, which is very small. However, of those 3% of bike car crashes, 20% of those crashes are serious injury crashes, and 9% of those crashes are fatal crashes that involve a death of a bicyclist. And what this really highlights is that bicyclists are more vulnerable to crashes than folks driving in cars. And you can kind of figure out why that is the case. You can imagine driving, you're in this nice metal shell, and if you were to have a crash, you're protected within that nice shell. As a bicyclist, you are very exposed. Your body is out there, exposed to the elements. So if you do encounter a crash, it tends to be more serious. So that's something to be aware of, and why we want to avoid bike car crashes as a whole. Well, honestly, we'd love to have our crashes be zero, but hopefully we'll get there one day. But right now, this is what our crash statistics are like. And then as drivers, we should be aware that most of our crashes between bicycles and cars happen at intersections and driveways. 89% of crashes happen at intersections and driveways. So we as drivers should pay extra special attention to our surroundings when we are at intersections and driveways so we can avoid conflicts. All right, so here's our first opportunity for you guys, or another opportunity for you guys to give us your input on this situation. So looking at the image and using your Ask a Question feature, let me know, what do you think? Is this legal or not? This activity that you see the bicyclist doing in the picture, is this legal or not? So I'm going to give you about 45 seconds or so to answer this. Go ahead and type in your response on whether or not you think this is legal or not in your Ask a Question feature. Lauren, our moderator, is there to see what you guys respond, how you respond. Okay, I can see some of your questions or some of your comments coming in, which is awesome. It looks like most people are answering the same, although it does look like we have a kind of a mixed response here. But the answer is no, this is not legal. And the reason why it is not legal is because the infrastructure, this bike lane here, does not indicate that the direction of traffic for bicyclists should be against the flow of traffic. This is not, there's no paint that indicates that this is a contraflow bike lane. So bicyclists should be riding with the flow of traffic, and this is not legal. This is an illegal activity here for this bicyclist, riding against the flow of traffic. So thank you for your responses there. So now we're going to jump into our first crash scenario, our first crash type. And this is actually our most common crash in Fort Collins. Something to keep in mind for the test. This is the right angle crash. So this is where a vehicle and a bicyclist will come into contact with each other at a right angle. So both the bicyclist and the motor vehicle driver are traveling in opposite directions. Oftentimes, this involves a bicyclist who is traveling against the flow of traffic, either on the street or on the sidewalk. And you can kind of see how this is how this crash type can happen and how it can happen more frequently. And you can picture yourself if you're driving, if you wanted to make a right turn as a driver, where are you going to be looking? You're probably going to be looking where you anticipate traffic coming. So if you're making a right turn, you're going to be looking to the left, looking for a gap in traffic for you to turn onto the road that you're turning onto. And if there is a bicyclist or even a pedestrian traveling in the opposite direction and you didn't look in that direction, you could easily miss that individual and encounter and experience a right angle crash. So how can we as drivers avoid this crash type? How can we avoid a right angle crash? So use your question, ask a question feature and type in your response. What are your thoughts on how we can avoid a right angle crash as a driver? Not as a bicyclist, but how can we avoid this type of crash as a driver? I'm going to give you some time here to think about that. And I do want to mention, as you guys are typing in your responses and how we can avoid this type of crash as drivers, it is legal in Fort Collins for bicyclists to ride on the sidewalk as long as it's not a dismount zone. In some other areas, some other cities like Denver, for example, bicyclists are not allowed to ride on the sidewalk. But bicyclists will ride on the sidewalk whether or not it's legal. Pedestrians will be on the sidewalk all the time. How can we avoid a right angle crash as drivers? What can we focus on that? Is it within our control as drivers? So I see that your responses are starting to come in. It seems like one student has actually experienced this crash before. I'm sure that was a really scary situation, and we certainly don't want to experience that again. And we're starting to get some responses from other folks. We can see that the traffic lights here are showing that the driver has a red light, and someone mentioned that drivers should be stopping and checking to make sure that both ways are clear. Yes, definitely do that. If the light was green, we would still want to be making sure that the area was clear. So you may not need to stop, but you do need to slow down and make sure that the area is clear before you turn. So as drivers, we should make sure that we're looking more than just to the left side where we're expecting to see traffic coming. We should also be checking to the right, looking for pedestrians, looking for bicyclists who might be riding the wrong way or riding on the sidewalk. That is really important. And we might have a lot of people who do decide to ride on the sidewalks, children in particular. A lot of parents teach their children to ride on the sidewalk. So it's important to be aware that we might have sidewalk users coming from the right side. So as drivers, we should be looking to the left, we should be looking to the right, we should be looking to the left again and checking the right. So looking all around us, have our head on a swivel. We should also be checking behind us too for bicyclists that might be approaching from behind. All right. Thank you so much for your responses. I appreciate it. It seems like most of you agree that looking both ways is the right thing to do as a driver to avoid a right angle crash. So thank you all for that. Moving on. Okay, so here's a real life example of how a right angle crash can happen. We have a bicyclist riding against the flow of traffic on the sidewalk, and we have our driver here inching out of a driveway. She's looking to the left because she's preparing perhaps to make a right turn, and she may miss this bicyclist altogether. So just keep that in mind. Look for people on the sidewalk and make sure you're looking in both directions, looking left, looking right, and also looking behind you before you proceed onto the roadway. Okay, so here's another crash scenario of a right angle crash. This is a real life example of a right angle crash. So this happened at CSU in the parking lot next to Moby Arena. And the yellow arrow here indicates the car's movement out of the parking stall. And the teal arrow on the bottom left side of your screen indicates the bicyclist movement in this crash scenario. So we have a car who is exiting the parking stall, and they are preparing to make a right turn to exit the parking lot. Meanwhile, at the same time, we have a bicyclist entering the parking lot, and they're entering the parking lot against the flow of traffic. And as the motorist is exiting the parking stall, they are making a right turn and they're checking the left for where they expect to see car traffic and didn't check the right side and encountered the bicyclist. And what you see on the right side of your screen is a photograph of the aftermath of the crash. The motor vehicle driver did hit the bicyclist, and the bicyclist did roll up on the hood and ended up doing this damage to the windshield. Both people involved in the crash were very shooken up. Luckily, no one was injured besides the windshield, but this was a very unpleasant experience. So the question is, how can we avoid this in the future? And it sounds like everyone has the right idea on how to avoid this type of crash, and that is look in both directions always. Look left, look right, look all around you. If you can make sure that you are also looking behind you, that's best case scenario as well. Best practice is to look in all directions. And also know that in parking lots, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of movements, and oftentimes these movements may not be happening in a very predictable manner. There's a lot of activity. So it's best to be hyper aware of your surroundings when you're leaving a parking lot in your car. And also if you're walking in a parking lot or biking in a parking lot, we should be hyper aware of our surroundings, use slower speeds, and look around us. All right. Cool. So here's our second legal or not question. So I want you guys to use the ask a question feature, type in your response. Do you think this image of the bicyclist, do you think that this is a legal activity for the bicyclist? Type into your chat feature. What are your thoughts? I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to go through this and answer. So while you're looking at this image, you can look at some of the details of the image too. So if you look at the far right side of the shoulder, you might see some debris piled up here, lots of gravel. So that's something to consider. Also, it's important to look at the bike that these folks are using. They have really narrow tires, and if you can imagine biking over this debris that you see on the right side, that could be a very hazardous situation. There could be broken glass in there that could cause a flat. It also, the gravel could be big enough to actually throw these bicyclists off balance and cause a crash. So if you remember my statement earlier, bicyclists should be riding as far to the right as they personally deem safe. So there are oftentimes hazards that wind up on the farthest right side of the road that can push bicyclists out further to the left because they want to avoid those hazards. So these bicyclists are probably trying to avoid the gravel and debris that they see on the right side of the road, and it could present a hazard, could possibly cause a flat for them, or might even, worst case scenario, cause a crash for either of them. So they're kind of scooted over further to the left, straddling this white line. So checking out the Q&A here, it looks like we're getting a mixture of responses, yes, no, maybe, not quite sure. So what the bicyclists are doing in this image is legal. They are riding as far to the right as they deem safe, and they're riding two abreast. And you remember from our earlier discussion about riding two abreast, it is legal for bicyclists to ride two abreast as long as they are not unreasonably obstructing the flow of traffic. And if you're looking around you, you can see this doesn't look like a very high volume traffic road. There's not a lot of cars here. So you can imagine how they would be impacting the flow of traffic here. Probably not much at all. So it is legal for them to be legally riding two abreast. And they're not riding farther over to the right because they're avoiding this debris. So this, again, is legal for the bicyclists to do. So you may encounter this type of situation when you're driving in your cars. All right, well, thank you for participating in that one. So then the question is next, why do cyclists ride in the lane? Why do they take the lane? So there's a variety of different reasons why bicyclists might choose to ride in the center of the traffic lane. And that is one, to possibly make a turn. This bicyclist in the left photo might be preparing to make a left turn. As a driver, you would never make a left turn from the right lane. You would make sure you're positioned your vehicle in the left turn lane or left lane to go left. So that's what bicyclists do as well, because we want to treat bicyclists like drivers of vehicles. So what they're doing, they're driving their bike like they're driving their car, positioning their bike in the leftmost lane to make that left turn. Bicyclists also may ride in the middle of the road to be more visible. Sometimes, well, you know that bicyclists are smaller profile vehicles, so it can be easy for us as drivers to miss them. So sometimes bicyclists may choose to ride in the middle of the lane or take the lane to be more visible for drivers so that they can avoid a crash. Bicyclists may also ride in the middle lane to avoid debris. So we talked about that gravel in the last image, but in the image on our screen right now on the right side, we can see all the snow and ice that's piled up in the bike lane. That can create a very hazardous situation for biking, possibly even cause a crash. So bicyclists will opt to ride in that nice, clear travel lane where the cars go, and take the lane there and drive their bike where it is safe, so to avoid debris. Also avoid this area called the door zone. This is the area right next to parked cars, which we're going to talk about more in detail later, but it's the area where an opening car door can cross the path of a bicycle. So bicyclists may ride 4 or 5 feet away from parked cars to avoid this door zone, or may even take the lane to avoid the door zone. And then triggering traffic lights. Sometimes bicyclists may feel, or sometimes there are sensors that really only detect cars at intersections. And in order for a bicyclist to trigger the light or feel like they are triggering the light, they may move into the travel lane to be detected by these sensors that are at intersections. So that's another reason. Okay, so we're moving on here. So the question here is, what do you think about this situation? Is this legal or not? So go ahead and type into your Ask a Question feature. What are your thoughts on this situation? So these are bicyclists and they are riding through a roundabout. Looks like we got a couple who are riding 2 abreast and another one who's behind them. They're definitely taking up the whole lane. They are taking the lane. So is this a legal action on the behalf of the bicyclist? Is this legal for the bicyclist to do? What are your thoughts? I'll give you a little bit of time here to answer this one. All right, looks like we got some answers coming in, which is great. I'm gonna give our moderator a little bit of chance to sift through your comments and let her give me a consensus on what seems to be your thoughts as a class. And while your answers are trickling in, I want you guys to think about, where is a roundabout near your school? Can you name an intersection that has a roundabout near your school? I know that there are several, so you can go ahead and type in an intersection if you can think of the names of the roads where a roundabout is located near your school. Please go ahead and type that into the Ask a Question feature, because I'd love to know your thoughts. Giving you guys a little bit more time here to get those answers out there. Thinking about also intersections near your school where there are roundabouts, because I know there's a lot of roundabouts near Fossil Ridge High School. So this is a situation that you may encounter quite a bit as drivers. All right, well, based on the answers that I'm seeing trickling in and based off of Lauren's comment on your responses, most people say that this is legal, and there's a handful that say that this is not legal. And the answer is, this is legal. Bicyclists can take the full lane in roundabouts. And there are several reasons why this is legal and why bicyclists should be taking the full lane in roundabouts. Roundabouts are more narrow roadways where there's really not enough space for a vehicle and a bicyclist to safely travel side by side. So for a bicyclist to travel safely through the intersection, they should be taking the full lane to defend their space in the traffic circle or in the roundabout and not encourage motor vehicle drivers to squeeze by them. And if they were to double up like these bicyclists are doing here, riding two abreast, they can more quickly and efficiently ride through the roundabout and proceed through the roundabout more quickly, and then move over to the right side of the road into the bike lane or shoulder or whatever is on the other side of the roundabout. So the answer again is yes, this is legal, and we do want bicyclists to ride two abreast so they can more efficiently ride through the intersection. All right, well, thank you for participating in that. Curious if anyone has mentioned an intersection with a roundabout near their school at Fossil Ridge. There's a lot of comments and I'm sifting through them. Oh yeah, we got some good ones. Ziegler and Drake. There's another one at Horsetooth. Kechter and Ziegler, yep, those are good ones, yeah. So just keep in mind that you have a lot of roundabouts near where you go to school. So if you're driving to school or driving in the area, you may encounter bicyclists taking the full lane in these roundabouts. So just keep that in mind and make sure you're not, when we're driving, trying to squeeze by bicyclists. Even if they're riding maybe on the outside edge, just know that we should not, as drivers, be trying to attempt to pass anyone in a roundabout. Make sure that we are allowing the bicyclists to have their space and proceed through the intersection. And we as drivers probably would only be slowed down just a little bit by waiting for a bicyclist, but only by a matter of seconds. Really not too much of a burden for us as drivers, so keep that in mind. So now I want to talk about our next crash scenario. This incident happened actually at an intersection near your school, at a bridge near your school at Kechter and I-25. So the Kechter Bridge crossing I-25 is a very narrow bridge, and there was a crash that happened between a bicyclist and a motor vehicle at this bridge. So here we have on the screen two arrows. The big yellow arrow represents a large vehicle, a dump truck, and the smaller blue arrow represents the bicyclist. They are both traveling in the same direction, and the driver of the large vehicle decided that he wanted to pass the bicyclist and moved over into the oncoming traffic lane to pass the bicyclist. As he was overtaking the bicyclist, he noticed that there was another car traveling in the opposite direction, in the oncoming direction, and the driver had to make a choice: either encounter this oncoming vehicle and potentially risk a crash, or move back over into his lane and encounter the bicyclist. So the driver opted to move back over into his lane, the westbound lane, and in doing so, he did crash with the bicyclist. And the result was the bicyclist did die, which is unfortunate. So my question for you guys as a class is, how can we as drivers avoid this situation? How can we avoid a crash with the bicyclist and avoid, having the end result being somebody's death? So type into your Ask a Question feature how we as drivers can avoid this situation. We're driving on a narrow bridge. There's a bicyclist. There doesn't seem to be enough room for us to legally pass the bicyclist. How do we deal with this situation? We're getting a lot of good responses here, so nice job, folks. I'm reading your responses, so don't mind the awkward pause here. And it looks like everyone is on the same page here. And Lauren, our moderator, agrees. Yes, so the answer is you should be patient, slow down, and wait to pass. You can look at the distance this bridge is. It's very short, so you can think about the amount of time we would be inconvenienced as drivers waiting for the opportunity for a safe place to pass. So yeah, the answer is just slow down and wait for a safe place to pass. Make sure you can see in the distance that you have enough room if you do choose to cross the double yellow line to pass the bicyclist. And if you can't see enough in the distance where you can see oncoming traffic, you should definitely wait behind the bicyclist until there is a safe opportunity to pass. And you really would only be inconvenienced by probably just a matter of seconds. So thank you all for that. Good job. All right, let's talk about the door zone here. So the door zone is the area we talked about a little bit earlier where your opening car door can cross a bike facility or a bike lane and into the path of a bicyclist. So you can see this painted bike lane here. The red painted bike lane, the red shaded portion of the bike lane represents the area of the bike lane that is within the door zone. So this is the area where bicyclists want to avoid, because if there could be potentially a motorist opening up their door into the path of the bicyclist and creating a very hazardous situation, an encounter with the door, which can be deadly. So the green area here indicates the safe area of the bike lane where bicyclists would ride to avoid the door zone. And here in this image, this is an image on campus on Lake Drive on campus at CSU, where the bike lane is completely within the door zone. So you might see bicyclists riding in the lane to avoid the door zone right next to what might seem from our perspective as drivers, a perfectly good bike lane. And you might ask yourself, why is this bicyclist not riding in the bike lane? Well, it could be for this door zone reason. They're trying to avoid the door zone, and the whole bike lane is a hazardous situation. So bicyclists may be avoiding that door zone. Some bicyclists may be unaware of this door zone. So how do we as drivers avoid opening our car door into bicyclists? So I want you guys to sit for a minute and picture yourselves in the driver's seat of your car. You have your hands on the steering wheel, you've just parked your car, and now you want to open up your car door and exit. So how would you naturally open the car door? You probably would choose to use your left hand to open up the car door. Now take a moment and practice opening up your car door with your opposite hand. Try opening your car door right now. Imagine opening your car door with your right hand and picture how that happens. So you're crossing your right hand across your body, and you can notice how that movement of using your right hand to open the car door starts to twist your body, and you're moving your head to your left side. And now suddenly you're in a position where you're looking over your left shoulder and looking behind you. So then you can notice more traffic and activity happening behind you, and activity that could be happening in the bike lane. Bicyclists who might be approaching from behind traveling in the bike lane. You can also be checking your mirrors, like the side view mirror that you see in the image on the left. So you can use the opportunity using your right hand to open the car door, your opposite hand to open the car door, twist your body to look over your shoulder, and also check your mirrors. So we advise drivers to use your opposite hand to open your car door, to look behind you and check your mirrors before you open your car door. So this is also called the opposite hand trick, or the Dutch reach. There's a lot of bicyclist activity in the Netherlands, so it's called the Dutch reach. So we advise you guys as drivers to use your opposite hand to open your car door. And also, if you have passengers, tell them to do it that way as well. So we all can avoid opening up a car door into the path of a bicyclist. All right, thank you for listening to that. All right, let's talk about our next common crash. This is the left cross crash. So this happens when we as drivers are trying to make a left turn. You can imagine yourself making a left turn in your vehicle. Oftentimes we're traveling at higher speeds. We're looking for gaps in traffic to see when we can make our attempt at a left turn. And there are plenty of ways where we could accidentally turn left into a bicyclist, a left cross crash with a bicyclist. You can think about the ways that bicyclists can be hard to see, or maybe we can misjudge their speed. Bicyclists can be hidden behind large profile vehicles. Let's see about some examples of ways that we could not see bicyclists and contributing factors to left cross crashes. So bicyclists can be hidden behind larger profile vehicles like this yellow van here on the left side. You know that bicyclists are smaller profile vehicles. They can be hard to see. They can be hidden behind these vehicles that are larger. So we might, as drivers, think that we have a gap in traffic and we're speeding up to try and shoot that gap. But meanwhile, that gap isn't really a gap, it's actually a bicyclist, and we might have a left cross crash scenario. And oftentimes these left cross crash scenarios result in more severe crashes or even more fatal crashes. So we definitely want to avoid these as drivers. So we should be really making sure that these gaps these gaps in traffic are actually gaps in traffic and not smaller profile vehicles like a bicyclist or a motorcycle or a scooter. So just keep that in mind. It can also be difficult for us to judge the speed and distance of bicyclists. So again, keep that in mind. And also other factors, environmental factors on the road. Shadows can shield bicyclists from our view and make it difficult for us to see bicyclists and make them less visible. So keep that in mind when we're trying to make our left turn, and really make sure that our left turn is going to be done safely. All right, next legal or not question here. So what do you folks think about this scenario here? We've got two trucks that are passing these bicyclists. They're crossing the double yellow line to give the safe and legal passing distance for bicyclists, which is 3 feet to pass. That is the legal requirement for vehicles to pass a bicyclist. We must give bicyclists 3 feet to pass. So is it legal, what we're seeing in this image here? Is it legal for these two vehicles to be crossing the double yellow line? So go ahead and type this into your question and your ask a question feature and let me know what you think. Is it legal for us as drivers to be crossing the double yellow line? We have some answers coming in here. So far, it looks like everyone's on the same page. So I'm seeing some mixed responses. Most people say this is legal. Some folks are saying this is not legal because it is a double yellow line. And in the state of Colorado, it is legal for cars to cross a double yellow line if it is safe to do so, meaning there's no oncoming traffic. It is legal for vehicle drivers to cross the double yellow line in order to give the safe and legal requirement, the safe passing distance to pass a bicyclist, which is at least 3 feet. So these motor vehicle drivers are actually giving more than 3 feet to pass the bicyclist. And I always say, if you can give more than 3 feet to pass, then do so. It makes it much more comfortable for the bicyclist. And it makes me feel better as a driver, knowing that I'm not creating these big wind blasts that can happen when you're traveling at high speeds and passing a bicyclist. Those wind blasts that you create with your vehicle can actually throw a bicyclist off balance and possibly cause a crash. So if you give them more space, that wind blast can be minimized. And just know that within the state of Colorado, it is legal to cross the double yellow line if it's safe to do so. If it wasn't safe to do so, you should slow down and wait to pass the bicyclist. So yes, it is legal to do this. All right, moving on to our next question. So let's talk more about safe passing. We talked earlier, I mentioned in the last image, last slide, that you need to provide at least 3 feet to pass a bicyclist. If you can give them more than 3 feet, please do so if it's safe to do that. But the minimum passing distance is 3 feet for motor vehicle drivers to pass a bicyclist. So 3 feet is shown in this image here. 3 feet is from the widest part of your car to the widest part of the bicycle. So this is oftentimes the side mirror of your car, or it could also be other projections on your vehicle that might be wider than the side mirror. Like, for example, if you're towing a trailer and you have like a spare tire on the trailer, or you've got a load that's overlapping the vehicle or the trailer that you're pulling, it would be 3 feet from the widest part of the items that are dangling off the trailer, for example. So it's 3 feet from the widest point of your car and 3 feet from the widest point of the bicycle, which is often the handlebars of the bicycle. All right, and if you don't have enough space to safely pass a bicycle, you should be slowing down and wait until it is safe to pass. And then how do you know when it's safe and safe for you to get back into your lane after passing the bicyclist? It's safe and you have enough distance once you can see the bicyclist in your rear view mirror. It's hard to judge what exactly 3 feet is from the end of your vehicle, from the trunk of your vehicle or the trailer that you might be pulling. You know it's safe to pass or safe to get back into your lane once you see the bicyclist in your rear view mirror. That's our good rule of thumb. So keep that in mind for the test. All right, next, legal or not. What are your thoughts on this one? So go ahead and use the Ask a Question feature here. What are your thoughts on this situation? And I know we're over our time by just a couple of minutes, so if you have to go, you can leave and you can watch the remainder of this presentation in the recording that we make available for you guys. But if you have the ability to hang on for a few more minutes, we'll make sure that we wrap up this presentation shortly. We just have a few more slides left. What are your thoughts on this? Is this legal or not? And you might need to specify, is this legal for the car? Is this legal for the bicyclist? We got some people who are specifying what is legal for the bike, what is legal for the car. And I'm going to go ahead and start chatting about this for sake of time. So we could see from the car and the amount of space that the car is giving the bicyclist that this is not legal for the car. The motor vehicle driver should be giving the bicyclists much more room to pass. I mean, they're giving them maybe a matter of inches between the car and the bicyclist. So this is definitely not legal for the car. The car should be giving at least 3 feet to pass, and they can cross the double yellow line legally to give that space or more space to pass the bicyclist. For the bicyclists, they're riding on the white line, and this is legal for the bicyclists. So not legal for the car, legal for the bicyclists. The bicyclists aren't riding further to the right because of the debris you might see in the image there. They want to avoid a crash. They're riding as far to the right as they deem safe. So this is legal for the bicyclists, illegal for the car because the car is not providing at least 3 feet to pass. All right, well, thank you for your responses on that. Now let's talk about the right hook crash. So this is a crash, another common crash that we have in our community. And this is where a car and a bike are traveling in the same direction, and they both are traveling through an intersection, and the motor vehicle wants to make a right turn. And if the motor vehicle turns right into a bicyclist, this is a right hook crash. So I want you guys to type into your Ask a Question feature, what are ways that we as drivers can avoid a right hook crash? All right, I see some answers coming in, which is great. A lot of good responses here. So folks are saying that they should be, the driver of the vehicle should be looking for the bicyclist. So if you're driving on a street and you notice a bicycle riding on the right or riding in the bike lane, and you want to make a right turn, you should slow down and wait for the bicyclist to cross through the intersection first. So as drivers, we don't want to speed up and try to pass the bicyclist. That can be a recipe for a right hook crash. We should also be looking for bicyclists approaching from behind. So using our mirrors, maybe our rear view mirror or our side mirror. And I'm going to move over to the next slide and look at best practice techniques that we can use as drivers to avoid a right hook crash. So when we have a bike lane, there are oftentimes when the bike lane approaches the intersection, these dashed lines, dashed paint that indicates this mixing zone that I talked about earlier on in the presentation. And this mixing zone is the area where vehicles can temporarily move into the bike lane to make a turn. So best practice, cars rather, we as drivers should be turning right from the furthest right lane that is available to us. So oftentimes this is the bike lane. So as drivers, we should be merging temporarily into the bike lane in this mixing zone area where there's that dashed paint. Make sure we're using our signal to signal to those around us that we are intending to turn right. Merge into the bike lane using that mixing zone and then turn right. And then We are merging into the bike lane when we know that the bike lane is clear. So we've checked behind us to make sure that no bicyclists are immediately behind us. And if there are, we will slow down and wait for the bicyclists to move through the intersection before we make our turn. So best practice again is to turn right from the furthest right lane. So this means we as drivers should be turning from the bike lane. And then we want to make sure that we avoid overtaking the bicyclists. Okay, now we're moving on to the tail end of our presentation, other situations that we should be aware of as drivers. There are definitely certain times of year when sun glare is a major problem and make it very difficult for us to see as drivers. Sometimes we might have windows or windshields rather that are super pitted. It can make it exceptionally difficult for us to see as drivers. So in these situations, we should make sure that we are driving at slower speeds and that we are really checking our surroundings to look for these lower profile vehicles like bicyclists and motorcycles and scooters that might be really difficult for us to see otherwise, and especially difficult in these situations where there's sun glare and fog. Fog doesn't happen super often in our area, but it does happen from time to time, and it can really decrease our visibility as drivers. So definitely drive at slower speeds when these situations are present. Also, make sure that we avoid parking in bike lanes. Bike lanes are for the exclusive use of people on bikes and not for us to be driving in unless there is a mixing zone and we are temporarily crossing a bike lane to do a turning movement. But we shouldn't be parking in bike lanes. This can create a potentially hazardous situation for people on bikes. It can force people on bikes out of the bike lane, and people on bikes may not have the skills to safely merge with traffic, which can potentially cause a crash and a deadly situation for a person on a bike. So avoid parking in bike lanes. If you're trying to drop someone off or park, try to turn around a corner and find an area where you are not parking in a bike lane. Just be aware of how parking in a bike lane can impact and create a hazardous situation for people on bikes. Other situations to be aware of are these illegal courtesies. So you might think of or ask yourself, what is an illegal courtesy? So this is any situation where we as drivers are trying to be nice and we're not following the rules of the road. Maybe we stop when we have the right of way. We stop maybe in the middle of the street and we wave on a bicyclist. This can create a possible hazardous situation as well, because other road users, other drivers may not be expecting us to stop, and then they could rear end us or cause another crash because you are not following the rules of the road. We are not following the rules of the road with these illegal courtesies. So avoid giving illegal courtesies. Always just follow the rules of the road, the first come, first served policy. Don't be waving on bicyclists because it can create a hazardous situation. Distracted driving is also a big hazard that we should be aware of. You know, if we're looking at our phones, texting, we could be missing things around us, especially these smaller profile vehicles, scooters, people on bikes, motorcycles, and it could cause a crash. Children are another thing that we could miss if we're distracted looking at our phones while we're driving. Children in general, even if we're not distracted, can be difficult for us to see. They have erratic behavior. They can dart out between cars, and their motor skills are not very well developed, so they're not super skilled when they're on their bikes. So we as drivers should pay extra special attention and drive at slower speed in school zones and on neighborhood streets or areas where there's playgrounds, because there could be children that might be darting out or riding erratically on the streets, so we should be cautious. All right, and here we are. This is the end of our presentation. So thank you for spending a few extra minutes with me. I just want to make sure that we leave this presentation with these key takeaways. So remember as drivers that bicyclists are also drivers of vehicles, and we should as drivers treat bicyclists as drivers of vehicles. And if we do that, everyone fares best, and we have safer roads when we do treat bicyclists as drivers of vehicles. So keep that in mind. We can take action to avoid crashes, mostly making sure that we are aware of our surroundings. Pay special attention at intersections and driveways. Remember that most crashes occur at intersections and driveways. 89%, almost 90% of our crashes occur at intersections of driveways. So we should be hyper vigilant in these areas. Know why bicyclists will take the lane and be prepared to share the road with bicyclists when they are taking the lane. Make sure to at least give that 3 feet minimum to pass. If you can give more than 3 feet to pass, that's best. And then always make sure that we are communicating. So we are communicating as drivers using our turn signals. We are also communicating as drivers by making eye contact with road users around us. So you know what their intention is, they know what our intention is, and most importantly, that we know that one another are present on the road. So we are all people using these roads, and we can do a lot together to keep each other safe. So let's just keep that in mind, try to take away these key principles here to be better drivers and avoid crashes. So thank you so much for joining me today. If anyone has any questions, please type them into the Ask a Question feature. Lauren and I will stay on for a couple more minutes to answer questions. But I do appreciate you guys giving us the time today and listening to our presentation. Keep a lookout for the link for the online test. Your teacher will be giving that out to you guys soon. And I do want to thank you for taking the time again to listen to our presentation. My name is Tracy again. I'm with the City of Fort Collins, and this presentation was created in collaboration with a nonprofit organization called Bike Fort Collins as well. So I'm going to stay on the line here if anyone has any questions. But again, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a little bit more of your time. And for those who are still on the line, I just got a message from Mrs. McVicker. She wanted me to point out and remind us that there was a pedestrian, a young student, who died not that long ago at Lopez Elementary. This happened at a crosswalk this year, and it was a low-speed crash between the pedestrian and the motorist. And this really highlights the unpredictability that children have, and that we as drivers should be driving especially slow, making eye contact with pedestrians around us, especially in school zones and at crosswalks, and know that children do have the tendency, especially younger children, do have the tendency to dart out into traffic. And we might think that they are waiting for us as drivers to go through the intersection, but there is a possibility that they might dart out. So just be prepared for that and be prepared to stop suddenly. All right, looks like people are leaving the meeting. I don't see any questions showing up. Again, you'll get a link to the quiz a little bit later. It will be an online quiz, and you'll have the opportunity to take it more than once. I appreciate you all again taking the time to join us today. Yeah, and hopefully you guys will all be safer and bicycle-friendly drivers out there.